Good afternoon and welcome everyone to the panel Using Geospatial Data to Ignite Innovations. On the panel today, we have Apu Kumar, CEO of City Data, calling in from San Francisco, Yuan Chao, Assistant Professor, National University of Singapore, and Jeroen Bors, Program Manager from TNO, dialing in from the Netherlands. Welcome, gentlemen. I'm Vanessa Ching from GeoWorks, and I'm your host for today. The speakers will share about the use of geospatial data and tools in the areas of population study, climate resilience, and urban planning. We shall begin with a 10-minute presentation from each speaker, to be followed by a panel discussion and Q&A. Audience, please feel free to post your questions along the way. First off, let's welcome Apu Kumar from City Data. Over to you, Apu.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. Great to be here. Would you please enable screen sharing? Thank you. Okay, here we go. Is this coming through?
Yes, looks good. Please proceed.
Fantastic. So again, thank you so much for inviting us to this panel today. And thanks for the introduction. I am Apu Kumar. I'm the CEO and founder of citydata.ai. And I'm going to start today's talk with a simple question for all of you. Do you know how many people are in your city today? I bet you many of us don't know the answer. And the truth is that most cities cannot quantify their population or their movement trends. There are cities that have tried satellite feeds, and those tend to be sporadic. There are sensors, cameras, they tend to be expensive or have privacy-related problems. And then there is the good old manual surveys or on-site click counting surveys, and those do not really scale well. And so this is essentially the problem that we set about trying to solve for cities, for counties, for planning areas, districts, regions, provinces. So City Data is a mobility intelligence company. We try to answer the question, how many people are in your city today? What are their mobility patterns? And then the most important thing, of course, is what is the real impact to citizens and how can we quantify that? A little bit about us. We are based in San Francisco in Silicon Valley. Happy to share that we've been recognized as a top 100 GovTech company, one of those startups that provides solutions, AI services to local government clients and agencies. And recently, we've also won the Smart 50 Award for mobility data innovation. And our solution to the problem, how many people are in your city, is to crowdsource data and bring in data from a variety of different sources to try and get a deep understanding of what is really happening in your city. And this could be a combination of data coming in from mobile apps. This could be data coming in from Wi-Fi and Bluetooth sources. This could be data coming in from your IoT grid. Our sole goal in bringing in all of this data into our cloud is to understand people density, movement patterns, and then evaluate the citizen impact for government agencies, mobility operators, and lately some enterprise businesses as well. And so we have been very busy aggregating this data at a global scale. And we've built these mobility replicas now for 1,580 cities worldwide. To bring in the data into our cloud, we also build first-party apps, and that's a key part of how we can source proprietary data sets. And so we have these citizen engagement apps that cities and local governments can give out to their citizens to share information with citizens and to bring back feedback from citizens. And so one of our apps is City Chat, which we give out to cities, municipalities, and it brings back a wealth of data for us. We also have other productivity apps like CityWorks. If you have a field team or a team that's out and about doing project work, and many cities do, you can use CityWorks to manage your remote teams and to increase productivity, notify your employees. And if you have a fleet to track, then we have CityFlow that helps you track your fleets, as well as your metros, your bus fleets, or your commercial fleets. And the combination of all of these apps, along with third-party apps and third-party data sources, brings us a wealth of intelligence. To get started with our platform, it's really very straightforward. You can start in 2 minutes by just simply connecting with your LinkedIn account. And most of us do have LinkedIn or Microsoft accounts. And once you're into the platform, you get access to the big table of cities. You can select the city that you'd like to go deeper into. In this case, I have selected San Francisco. You might as well select Singapore or Kuala Lumpur or Bangkok, depending on what's the city of interest to you. Once you select your city, you can start to study the people density heat maps, as in how many people in different parts of your city and what are the trends over time. You're looking at a heat map for the Golden Gate Park, which is one of the largest parks in the city of San Francisco here. And the deep reds show you the parts of the park where we've seen a lot of people and a lot of activity. By the same token, you can start to analyze the footfalls or place visits. So it's one thing to have raw data, crowdsourced data from a variety of sources and give cities a sense for how many people are in that part of your city. But that is a sample representation of what's really happening in that area. And so in order to scale up to fully represent what really happened there, you need to have some amount of ground truth. You need to apply your machine learning models, and then you build your mobility digital replica, which then accurately represents what happened in Golden Gate Park. And so you can analyze place visit footfalls using our platform. Once you know how many people, the next logical question tends to be, where did they come from? And so those are the OD movement patterns that can be easily figured out using a geospatial platform like what we've built here. And you can also correlate these movement patterns with other open data sets like demographic data, age, income, occupation, and try and infer how are these different factors influencing the movement through your city. With the pandemic, a lot of us realized that footfalls decreased as soon as you had the movement controls imposed, but footfalls started to come back and rise again as soon as the economy started to reopen. But how can you really measure that? And so we've seen a lot of requests coming our way from cities and municipalities trying to get a sense for how many people are really coming back into our downtown areas, our commercial zones, our industrial zones, our trade areas. And it's quite easy to get a sense for the economic activity if you can track footfalls in different parts of your city, in your blocks, in your planning areas. And by the same token, you can also overlay the heat maps with building footprint data. So if you have the building footprints for your commercial zones and you want to get a sense for what is the occupancy rate for this part of my commercial real estate, you can get a sense for that by just looking at what are the heat maps and trends over time as compared to your building footprints. In some cities, we have gone a little deeper to get a sense for the public safety angle. So we've looked at crime incidents and crime data, both current as well as historical. Compared that with the people presence and movement patterns and heat maps to try and see what are the correlations across different crime categories and bring back those insights to cities, which helps them build safer and more resilient cities. And all of this is very useful, not just for this point in time, but also if you're able to do it historically and go back in time. And so one of the unique features that we keep getting requested from cities and from municipalities is, can you do this going back for 3 months in 2020? Or can you do this going back for all of 2019 pre-pandemic? And the answer is yes, you can do very deep historical surveys on demand for any part of your city or your planning areas or your airports and your touristic zones by just going back in time and requesting archived data sets that exist for 3-4 years, all the way back to 2018. In the US, with the new infrastructure spending and the renewed focus on cities and roadways and public transit, with the $1 trillion infrastructure bill that is almost all the way through now, there is this renewed focus on how do you apply these funds and how do you make the best use of it. And so we realized that by understanding where are the people, you can advise cities on where should they make the investments for new infrastructure, whether it is parking meters, it is solar lighting points, or electric vehicle charging stations. You have to start with where are the people and what are the density and movement patterns. And along the same lines, with the proliferation of 5G, a lot of the telcos are starting to grow and enhance their networks. But it brings us back to the same point. How do you grow your network? And do you want to install your 5Gs in places where the people really are? And so we can come in with independent data sets and independent verification of people density and movement patterns, which helps telcos to grow their 5G networks in ways that can bring a better service and a better experience to people where they are. And as a US company, we are obviously very active in North America and also in LATAM, but we are super engaged in Southeast Asia. And so one of the things that we have started to see even in Southeast Asia is urban air mobility, with some of the trials that have been going on in Singapore as well. And urban air mobility operators who are building these electric vertical takeoff landing aircraft need to understand how to operate the business. Where do you install your vertiports, your heliports, and how do you drive efficiency? And all of this comes back to geospatial data. And last but not the least, our platform is truly available for all of Southeast Asia. It is translated into 7 languages, and you can not only experience these insights in your local language, but you can also transact in your local language in Southeast Asia. With data comes privacy. These go hand in glove. And as a data company that is crowdsourcing massive quantities of data, we have to be very compliant with the GDPR in the EU, CCPA in the US, PDPA in Singapore, and throughout Southeast Asia. So there's a whole bunch of work that goes into anonymization, obfuscation, and aggregation of these data sets so that we can truly bring value to these municipalities in the most privacy compliant way. We build mobility replicas for 1,580 cities. We are adding more cities each day. And our goal is to use deep AI, geospatial data, machine learning, and all the techniques that can be used to build safer, smarter, and more resilient cities. So with that, I'll hand it back to you, Vanessa. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kumar. Thank you, Apu. Before we go to the next speaker, we would like to pose this question to you. How is geospatial data being used for improving interactions between cities and communities?
So we are seeing a significant increase in the use of geospatial data to guide people through the physical environments and enhance their understanding and experience of each space. And this is actually true of complex built environments like urban centers, healthcare, educational campuses, transportation facilities. And the pandemic has influenced the thinking of local government, pushed them to adapt to disruptive changes that were already happening in their cities, but rapidly adopt new technologies and apps as well. So many metros are starting to use mobile apps and online dashboards that are based on geospatial data to share information about COVID cases, healthcare availability, vaccine schedules in their cities and counties. So there's massive use of geospatial data and analysis there. And while some of this happened in the past for contagious diseases, we've never experienced the level of focus on geospatial data that COVID was able to bring. We also saw a rise of chatbots based on geospatial data in the past 12 months. So citizens had to stay at home, they had to shelter in place. It became imperative that local governments should bring data and information using geospatial bots as an example to citizens. And so we've started to see a lot of that happen. And one of our own bots, which is a AI chatbot, geospatial AI chatbot called CC, she can share information about permits, construction projects, emergency alerts to citizens, and also bring in an angle of augmented reality to inform citizens with immersive experiences. So there has been a lot of changes that have happened in improving interactions between cities and communities using geospatial data and geospatial technologies. But I think COVID was a real accelerant for this.
Thank you, Apu. It looks like this is it actually is a good introduction to what Yuan Chao will be talking as well. Is how we use the GIS tools and the new Geospatial tools to simplify all those workflows for clients across different industries. Our next speaker, I'm pleased to introduce Yuan Chao, National University of Singapore, who will speak about new urban planning GIS tools to improve climate resilience. Over to you, Yuan Chao.
Okay, so everybody can see my slides? Yeah, okay, thank you. So thank you for the introduction. I'm Yuan Chao from NUS. I'm very happy to attend this event and have this opportunity to share our work at NUS. Today, I'm going to talk about the geospatial approaches for better urban planning and climate resilience. When we start to talk about the climate resilience, we still start from the climate change. So compared with the previous study, this one is the local impact of climate change in Singapore. We use the machine learning method to downscale the global scale modeling result to the district scales. So actually, these red lines show the air temperature increment at Pulau Ubin. So we run the simulation and for the different scenarios and indicates that at the 2080s, Pulau Ubin, the air temperature increment could be 2 degrees above. This slide is about the effect of the urbanizations. So one is the temperature at the Newton, and another one is the air temperature at the Pulau Ubin. We can see both of them, the air temperature at both sides are increasing, but there's the gap. Actually, this gap is not caused by the global climate change. This gap is caused by the urbanization. And we use the GIS method to estimate, okay, so what's the air temperature increment at different locations with different densities. And based on the URA master plan, and we estimate the plot ratio in the future and use the plot ratio values to calculate the air temperature increment. So on this map, actually, we can see for some urban areas, which is already quite dense, for example, Newton, in the future, the plot ratio will not increase a lot. So the delta T, the air temperature increment is okay, a little, not very significant. But at some urban areas, for example, the north area in Singapore or Sentosa Island, in the future, the plot ratio will be increased significantly. So as we can see here, and the delta T, the air temperature increment will be also increased a lot. So this kind of research output, the measurement data observation, tell us actually the urban climate is very important to the urban planning. But what's the challenge? Okay, so if our city is like this, the thing will be very simple to describe our urban surface, to run the simulation, to do the modeling, because we only need 2 values to describe our city surface, 1 and 0. But in the real life, actually our city is like this. The urban morphology is super heterogeneous. This kind of urban morphology make the surface descriptions is very difficult and make the modeling work very expensive. So actually, this is the motivation why we want to develop the GIS tools. So we want to make the modeling method cheaper and easier and more practical. And the so-called GIS tool is not only the modeling tool, which is also the planning tool. So this one is the first GIS tool, the first example. We develop a GIS tools to estimate the air pollutant concentration caused by the traffic. I took this photo nearby the Orchard Road, and this is our simulation result. We use the GIS-based analytical modeling tools, and this color bar is not the pollutant concentration. This color bar is the dispersion potential. Tell us how fast the air pollutant can be dispersed from the bottom of the street canyons to the top of the street canyons. So you can see at the urban areas with higher density actually take longer time to be dispersed for the air pollutant. This slide shows how we developed this GIS tool. I will not go to the details. I just want to show the validation result here. Okay, and we can see the red dot is the wind tunnel experiment result conducted by the different researchers in Japan at Hong Kong. And the black solid line is our modeling result. Actually, you can see the modeling result can match with each other very well. So we also cross-compare the result with the CFD simulation, which is very expensive. The red line is the CFD simulation result. The blue dashed line is our modeling result. As we can see within the street canyons, basically they are the same. They match with each other very well. But this simulation is cover the 10 kilometer by 10 kilometer urban areas. If we use the CFD simulation, it will take maybe several months or 1 month by using the supercomputer. If we use the this GIS tool, it will only take us about several hours by using our own laptop. No need to use the supercomputer. And this two maps actually is the implementations on urban plannings. So for example, the bottom one, the red grid show actually is the urban areas with the very low pollutant dispersion potential. So the urban planner will know, okay, so we should not put the urban functions, for example, the bus terminal with the very heavy emissions at this kind of the red grid areas. So this is the first example. So this is the second example for the anthropogenic heat. We focus on anthropogenic heat from the AC at the residential buildings. Every night, everybody is at home and turn on the AC because the Singapore is tropical cities. It's very hot. And this kind of anthropogenic heat, highly possible, will be trapped in this kind of very deep street canyons. And the heat will heat up the surrounding air, and then we will have the higher surrounding air temperature, something like this. So we look at the impact of the anthropogenic heat effect on the surrounding air temperatures. And this is the GIS modeling result. And the left-hand side is the result within the scenario, the normal situation with the annual wind speed. So we can see actually the impact of the anthropogenic heat is not significant totally, less than half degrees, only 1.34 degrees. So at the normal situations, we don't need to worry too much about the anthropogenic heat from the residential buildings. But at the extreme situation, so what is the extreme situation? For example, the incoming wind is very low, 1 meter per second, okay, at the 300 meters above the ground, which is very low, but happened in Singapore's history. And at this kind of scenarios, actually the air temperature increment caused by the anthropogenic heat from residential buildings could be 2 degrees. 2 degrees is very significant to the thermal comfort. It's very significant to the building energy consumptions. And based on this modeling result, modeling work, we move forward. We look at the daily variance. What's the difference at different moment within 1 day? And this is the maximum values of the air temperature increment. It happened at midnight from 11 p.m. to 12 p.m., which is quite not very surprising because everybody is at home and using the AC at midnight. And actually, this kind of result showed very clearly the distribution of the air temperature increment at the residential areas. And this kind of result can have the very direct impact on energy consumption study. This is what we are working on now. Okay, so this is the third one, the third tools, and we developed to evaluate the thermal environment at the city scales. And we calculate the urban morphology index, for example, the sky factor, frontal density, to estimate the UHR intensity and identify the potential air pass. And very interesting, we used our new method to identify the air pass. And we can see the black arrows on this map is the air pass. And we use the NA data to validate whether our air pass can work or not. And actually, we can see the local wind rows, the prevailing wind directions are very consistent with the orientation of the air pass. So that means that the weather data show us the air pass identified by these GIS tools can work in the real life. So this is what I have for today, and this is our lab. So if you want to know more about our GIS tools, and you can visit this website. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Yuan Chao, for the very insightful presentation. We would like to know more about your tools. Is this open source? Was it developed in-house by NUS? And what is your plan for this GIS tool that's been developed?
So this is free to download. Yeah. So this is the open source, all the open source tools. Yes. So we are put on all the tools on the website, and we hope more people can use these tools.
All right. Perhaps we can share the URL later after the during the Q&A session. All right. Thank you, Yuan Chao. So next we have Jerome Bors from TNO, who will share about data-driven holistic urban planning and design. Over to you, Jerome.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe you can enable the share button. Maybe if you stop sharing, Yuan Chao.
Yeah.
Thank you. So if everybody can see my slide. My name is Jeroen Borst and I work for TNO. TNO is an independent research organization from the Netherlands. So independent from government, you could say between government, industry and academia. And our mission is to innovate and create value from the innovations that are being ignited by universities in the Netherlands, but basically all over the world, and make them applicable for businesses and for governments. So we're really in between there. My role is cluster manager of societal impact. And we use digital twins to show what the societal impact of transitions in especially mobility, as well as energy and related issues are on cities. And so what I would like to present is how digital city twins help to realize sustainable goals of our cities. So how can we improve life in cities? Because nowadays, well, you could say a lot is going on. As you might recognize, there is a struggle, a battle for space, you could say, in cities. Cities have to safeguard accessibility, but also sustainability, keeping it sustainable also for the next generations, and for everybody. So equality or equity are words that we use for that. And we have to create a good living environment, however you might define that. And that while there are quite some transitions going on, some were already referred to, we have digitalization, platform economy when it comes to energy as well as mobility or logistics. Mobility as a service are one of these topics arising. We also have electrification. So you could say the climate agreement, the Paris Agreement, changes the way how we drive mobility, how we look at energy consumption, also climate effect mitigation. And the middle one is automation. When you look, for instance, in mobility, we see more and more the ability for vehicles to drive autonomously, and in the future that will impact the way that we move around in cities. It will change, you could say, the proposition of mobility and of logistics, and there is a challenge for cities to regulate that, to keep a grip on that. And one of the instruments we built in order to get that grip, in order to build these digital city twins in which you could say, play around with different scenarios and look at the impacts, is what we call urban strategy. And urban strategy is an integrated planning tool for cities. And in urban strategy, we interlinked data. And I think Apu showed some very good examples of data sets, data streams that become available nowadays. These data sets, when you look at digital city twins, are quite large. So we developed a special way to deal with large data sets, distributed data sets or data streams, because you could say the commercial off-the-shelf products are no longer really scalable when it comes to these sizes of data, to these amounts of data. We had to innovate there. Another component are models in order to predict what is happening, what will happen in the future. And I think Juan Chao already showed some beautiful models that are able to describe what is happening, the mechanisms that are behind it, that enable you to predict towards the future what will happen when it comes to mobility or emissions. And one of the challenges that we picked up is that we wanted to make these models way much faster than the current state of the art in order to enable real interaction with the system, so you can play around. So calculation times from we were used to like hours or days, using high performance computing, using parallelization on video cards. We brought it back to seconds or minutes. And that allows you to use these complex models and these large data sets in a workshop setting, for instance. So you can really discuss on what is happening on these different topics, on these different domains. And one important aspect as well is, the interface, so the human-machine interface, different ways to interact with the data. So what you get then, what you see are visual representations of a city covering different aspects of what is happening in the city. I will go into that a bit later in the presentation. And it allows you to, literally stand around the table, if COVID allows us again, and see what is happening, create awareness of the situation when it comes to air pollution and mobility and energy and things like that, and to together discuss what is happening, see what changes in the urban environment, like adding new buildings or adding new roads or changing functions, will have on different KPIs. And we have the ability to visualize that immediately. And just to give an example of some of the most used simulation models that we have under the hood in our digital city twins are mobility. And Apu already showed how much data is involved when it comes to mobility. We translate that, you could say, to mobility demand. We want to understand in our model how many people are traveling or willing to travel from each zone to each zone, also for different modalities, so different ways of transportation. And if we combine that information, that model, with the networks, either the road network or the public transport network, we can assign the traffic flows on that network, and we see how the capacity is sufficient or not of that network, and how mobility flows are distributed through the city. And then when we know the traffic flows, and we already saw an example of that, if you combine that with emission models and dispersion or propagation models, you can calculate air quality, different substances, and noise, for instance, traffic-related noise or rail traffic-related noise, and visualize that in combination. But also, as said, the energy component in cities is very important. So we also can combine this with models that describe where energy is being produced, especially focusing on sustainable energy production, because that is the most complex in cities to model, because, well, you cannot, like a power generator, you can switch on or off. Solar panels or wind turbines are, you could say, led by nature. So you have to model what is happening there in order to see the impact on the grid and on the energy system. And then especially when you combine it with the electrification of the mobility, especially focusing, for instance, on, well, in Singapore, we started with the electrification of the bus fleet to see where, I will go to in that a bit later in the presentation, but to see the impact of large-scale electrification of mobility. And then we can translate that into parameters like the global warming potential, CO2 or the equivalents, or the health impact effects, how all these parameters affect people in the city. To give an example of the flow or of how these models, you could say, interact, is that we start with the urban spatial plan and how the population is divided in the city. And the interfaces allow us to, well, add new buildings or add entirely new build-up areas, including the functions and the populations. And from that, you could say, if you add new build-up areas or new parts of the infrastructure, this will alter the mobility patterns. And it's not only about cars or public transport, but it's also about how much and where do people use the bike. In the Netherlands, cycling is one of the in the cities, especially, cycling is one of the more important modes of transportation, sustainable mode of transportation, as well as walking. If you understand the urban fabric, we also have models that predict which routes people will take when they walk through the city. And if we have these mobility patterns, as said, we can derive the environmental impacts, either let it be air pollution, noise, but also CO2 emissions, so greenhouse gas emissions. And when we know the concentrations and we know where people live or where they move through the city, we can assess the exposure using exposure response curves from studies that we or universities do on the relation between concentrations or noise levels and the response. We can derive on a community level. It's not possible on an individual level, but on a community level, well, the health impact or the noise annoyance, for instance, the community response to noise is something that we can model, and something that is a important KPI for city governments to steer upon. And as said, in our digital twins, we made these models interlinked, so you don't have to switch them on and off by yourself, but once you change something in the model, these changes will cascade through the system automatically, and it goes very fast. I don't have the ability to show a video now, but in a matter of minutes, we have these results. And how we apply it, I will quickly show some examples. One of them is in our capital, Amsterdam, where the city is actually using this digital twin to strategically plan the densification of the city. More people want to live in Amsterdam. Amsterdam wants to accommodate that. But then the big challenge is how to facilitate mobility and stay within, you could say, environmental boundaries to keep the city livable. And using the digital twin, Amsterdam is building different scenarios to overcome, you could say, these challenges, keeping the city accessible as well as livable on a strategic level, but also on, you could say, the tactical level, where to plan exactly, and how to plan roadworks in such a way that the city stays accessible. Another application of the same digital twin approach is one that we applied in Singapore together with LTA, the Land Transport Authority, is on the bus electrification strategy. And Singapore has the ambition to electrify mobility, starting with buses, or another way of saying, to make mobility sustainable. Electrification is one of the options, but if you electrify the 6,000 buses, give or take, that are in Singapore, it will have a large implication on land use. It will consume space if you have to put up charging locations, or if you have to intensify the energy grid. And with the software, we could build scenarios, or actually LTA is building scenarios to see how different electrification strategies fit in the urban fabric and how it fits to the existing energy grid. And the last example that I want to show is application of the digital twin on Curacao, island of Curacao in the Caribbean, where we use, and the island uses the digital twin to make the transition towards sustainable mobility and energy. And together with all stakeholders on the island, we build a roadmap to see how we can make the energy production as well as mobility, not only land-bound mobility, but also maritime, more and more sustainable, step by step. And using the digital twin, using this geospatial information, we investigate the feasibility as well as the spatial impacts of these transitions. That are the examples of the application of what we are doing that I want to show. So if you want to learn more, you can contact me by email, as shown on this slide. Okay, and with this, I would like to hand it back to you, Vanessa.
Thank you very much, Jeroen. So we will now proceed to the panel discussion. If you have any questions for the speakers, please post it in the Q&A box. Let us talk about resiliency. So Apu, what are some recent examples of resiliency projects based on geospatial data?
That's a great question, Vanessa. So if you look at the US has a unique set of problems based on both natural disasters and human-made disasters. The West Coast suffers from wildfires and earthquakes. The East Coast suffers from storms and hurricanes. The middle of the country braces for tornadoes almost every month. And so the disruption can be significant and the damage can be extensive from such events. And as part of their resilience plan, cities, counties, states are starting to realize that they need to prepare, they need to protect, and they need to find ways to rehabilitate. Because the impact of these disasters can be measured using geospatial data, so we can measure and quantify the movement patterns of people. When the warnings go out, you can get a sense for how is the evacuation happening by looking at geospatial patterns. We can measure how people react during the event, and you can also measure how people relocate after the event. So some people might leave the impacted areas temporarily, some might leave permanently. Longer term studies are also possible to see how many people from an impacted area actually returned back to the impacted area within 3 months, 6 months, 12 months after the disaster. So while day-to-day life can be severely disrupted and the economy overall is also hugely impacted, we can also measure how businesses may have had to shut down temporarily or permanently, measure footfalls as people start to come back into shops and pharmacies, retail locations. And history tends to repeat itself. So by studying these disasters in the past using rich geospatial data sets from sources like mobile apps, satellite streams, IoT networks, cities, counties, states can prepare, protect, and rehabilitate. And thankfully, we are starting to see cities do much of this now in the US as part of their plan for resiliency. And we hope that we can help bring some of these same capabilities to cities and provinces and states in Southeast Asia as well.
Thank you, Apu. So Yuan Chao, you shared just now about the models that was launched in Singapore, the studies in Singapore as well. So would you like to expand on Apu's sharing just now? How is geospatial data being used in the climate modeling to better monitor and forecast the local microclimate for sustainability and resilience?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the questions. So we always say that there's the gap between the urban climate and urban planning. And we need a better urban planning. We need a better understanding on urban climate, okay, to prepare ourselves for the future challenges. But even with the same objectives, okay, so for example, the health living environment, okay, when the urban climatologists and urban planners, when they work, they look at the totally different things. Urban climatologists looking at the airflow, air temperature, turbulent structures, but the urban planners look at the land use densities, urban morphologies, building topologies, even though with the same objective, as I said, but they look at the totally different things. So this, I guess, is the basic reason of this gap. And when the urban planners look at the urban climatologists' work, they will say, oh, the city model is oversimplified, which is not real, okay? And when the urban climatologists see urban planner simulation work, they will say, okay, so this simulation is too simple, cannot provide the accurate information. And sometimes the urban climatologists try to provide very straightforward information to urban planners. For example, the air temperature will increase 2 degrees, for example. But the urban planners, it feels like it's not straightforward enough to urban planners to make decisions. They don't know whether they should decrease the power ratio or decrease the building footprint areas, which way is more efficient, which way they should choose. So this is the motivation why we developed the GIS tool. So within the GIS tool, we calculated the urban morphology, which is also the urban planning index. So that means that urban planners know how to improve their urban planning. So whether they should decrease the building height or whether they should decrease the building footprint areas to increase the sky factor, for example, like this. Yeah. And
thank you. Yeah, that's a very interesting insight. So do you see a lot of collaboration from different departments, divisions, and roles as well? Maybe to Jeroen, you can input on how you're working with your clients or organizations. Do you see more hybrid roles appearing in the future, where data analyst is not just specific for the function, but they have to have, he or she may need to have other skill sets as well, along with their current skill sets?
Yeah, exactly. So a big challenge for larger organizations is to work together, transdisciplinary or cross-cutting the different silos, you could say. And one of the challenges that we like to this is really the challenge that we like to overcome. So to make insightful with our the way that you visualize the outputs on different domains, to make it really easy to understand what is happening when it when it comes to mobility or air quality or urban heat, for instance. And as I said, to make the modeling very fast, so you can play around with scenarios. And what we see over and over again is that if you do that, play around literally with scenarios, it contributes to the mutual understanding across these silos, and you see that discussions start between different experts or heads of departments, or even political leaders that are responsible for the different silos. So you could say bringing the integral insight, also what Jean Chao is saying, helps in really get this integral discussion on the table.
Thank you, Roy. So we have a question here. Perhaps somebody would like to take this question? Open to any speaker.
Well, I can answer that for myself, for ourselves. Currently, with what you saw, almost all the software is built in-house by TNO. And that is driven by, well, let's say how we started. We said, well, we want to create this integral view and make it very fast. And we had as a starting point that we didn't want to build anything anew. So we started with off-the-shelf products and integrating them. But then we found out that it became a challenge to make the models very fast. So we created our own modeling software, parallelized. Then we found out that the current interfaces, GIS interfaces, are not capable of really real-time display or visualize this type of information, this large amounts of information. So we started building it ourselves. And then when we started scaling up the amount of data and the amount of processing power, also distributed, the last step was that we had to build our own data solution, a data solution that is an implementation, you could say, of the Google protobuf communication and storage protocol. But it's something that we had to implement ourselves because we couldn't find anything commercially available that was able to reach this performance.
So over to Apu and Yuan Chao as well. What you describe in your tools is you actually democratizing the software and the workflow for a lot of users out there with the tools they've developed. So a question to Apu, how did you come about the idea of developing this platform that you have right now with your company?
So we started out by first embedding ourselves in the mayor's office in the city of San Francisco to just understand what are their pain points. And then we repeated this process because if you're going to sell to cities, you need to understand cities really well. So we did the same thing with the city of San Jose, the city of Oakland, city of San Leandro. And once we got a good sense for what their challenges are, we realized that geospatial data, or the lack of thereof, and geospatial analysis is a major pain point. And not because the tools are not there. There are lots of tools. There's Esri, there's ArcGIS, there's Carto, there's tools from Google. There's tools all over. But it's getting the tools to do what they're supposed to do and getting the right data sets into those tools and building the right models and then building that pipeline that goes all the way through and produces the output that's meaningful for these cities. And you got to keep in mind that many of these cities don't have data scientists, they don't have chief data officers, they don't have large engineering teams. And so they may be able to license a tool, but they may not know how to really use it the right way. And so looking at all of these different problems in the geospatial realm, we realized that there really is a need to create a simple set of tools that cities can use and get an output that is meaningful, quick, and usable. So that's how this thing came about.
What about you, Yuan Chao? From your side, do you see a lot of use cases and models being developed using supercomputing and HPC platform still, or are you seeing the trend towards newer tools?
Yeah, so actually we use the supercomputer, the HPC, a lot. So even though I emphasize the GIS tools are very useful, right? But we still, our team still want to know more about the urban climate, especially the multiphysics phenomena. So we need to run the numerical simulations, and we use the supercomputer, and we investigate. Okay, so what's the buoyancy effect on airflow, and what's the buoyancy-driven airflow? How the buoyancy-driven airflow affects the air pollutant dispersion, something like this. And we hope we can apply our GIS tools using the supercomputer. Then we can extend the current research scope. Now the current research is at the city scales, and we hope we can extend the application to the global scale. Yeah, thank you.
That's great. We have a question about digital twins. Would any speaker like to take this question?
Well, this is a question about the including BIM models, so building information models, in digital twins. And well, the short answer to this is yes, this is possible, but it is a challenge because the amount of information that is in one BIM model, so the model of one building, is depending on the scale or you could say how elaborate that model is, can be the same amount of information than to describe an entire city or part of a city on a lower level of detail. So there is a bit of a challenge there. But one solution that we brought to the table, that we have shown in a European project, is that we made the connection between the two types of models, where you have a set of BIM models of the individual buildings in different databases, and the digital city twins connects to these different databases. And once you zoom in and you grab one of the buildings in the city model, it you could say makes the connection to the BIM database. And the challenge is then to visualize that in such a way that it becomes, or that it seems seamless. I hope that's understandable for the yeah. But it is a challenge, and it is possible.
Thank you. So we'll come to the last question. Everybody's curious about pandemic. So how will geospatial data be used to deal with the pandemic caused by airborne transmission of infectious diseases like COVID?
No, maybe I answer this question. Yeah. So the social distance 1 meter is a very basic and also very important safety measure. And during the pandemic, actually, this is a very useful and very important measures. And because it's very easy and very be applied by everybody at everywhere. But when the Singapore decide to open, okay, to enter the endemic, so becomes the long-term things, but not the short-term things. So actually, we need to differentiate, specify these values 1 meter, given the different urban density and the different virus dispersion potentials. Let's say, okay, so for example, on Sentosa Beach, the 1 meter could be enough. But at the Orchard Road, which is very crowded, but then 1 meter is not there enough. So that we need to have this kind of long-term strategies to help us to adapt into the endemic. Yeah, so this is my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Apu, do you have any comments you want to share?
Yes. So we've done a lot of work over the past 14, 15 months now, looking at mobility data and trying to figure out if the data can be used for building pandemic propagation models. So if you know, for example, that there is a hotspot or a red zone in a part of your city, and you know the movement patterns in and out of that place roughly over the past 14 days, you can then start to predict where else might you see the next red zone, if you will. And being able to build these models can help in a variety of ways, of course, controlling from a healthcare perspective and planning for it, but also your movement control decisions and where exactly do you want to impose it and to what extent do you want to impose it, making it easier for citizens, because as we all know, it's very hard. It's been very, very hard for a lot of us around the world. So making it easier for administrators to have meaningful data to make those decisions. There are ways to build these models, and I think this will only get better. There's a whole bunch of academics who are seriously looking at this space, and so we're hoping that with geospatial data, mobility intelligence, we'll be ready for the next one.
Thank you very much, Apu, and thank you to speakers. With that, we will end this panel session. Thank you, audience, for joining us. Do stay on for the next webinar. We do have the Geospatial Data Panel Part 2 on Friday with a new speaker as well. Do join us then. Thank you and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Vanessa.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.